Well, let's just jump right into it. I'm going to share the screen here because Kyle Van Noy had this to say, and we'll hear what he had to say, and then we'll get some thoughts from you on it. Here we go. This is the Ravens outside linebacker after the Ravens beat the Niners.
But did we give the blueprint? Did we give the blueprint for the rest of the NFL? I think we did. I think everybody's going to write their notes down. I think D coordinators, people around the league are going to see what we just did to the Niners. And I think it's the blueprint. But
there you go. He thinks it's the blueprint. Didn't say exactly what it is that they did. There are a couple of thoughts that I have. One is, I think he may be right. And I know people would be like, oh, Kyle Van Noy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And a lot of Niner fans have pushed back hard on that. But I think we saw some things in this game that we haven't seen other teams do, which is they brought extra pressure off the edges and got home on Brock Purdy and dropped people into the middle of the field inside the windows that he has had a lot of success throwing into throughout this year, and just made his job more difficult. And ultimately, like, they dropped the linebacker on the first, or they blitzed the linebacker on that first drive. He threw right behind him, and Kittle got a big gainer. Well, then all of a sudden he started blitzing off the edges in these condensed formations, and they started either getting home or forcing that ball out quickly. And then they had Kyle Hamilton and their defenders playing in a zone, and they just read the quarterback's eyes, sat in those where they anticipated him to be throwing balls into certain windows, and were there and got their hands on a lot of footballs, and either arrived right on time and tipped it into the air and made the pick, or actually broke it up, or so they thought they had an impact. And I think that it's not like it's some huge secret, but I do think the Commanders, Rams, and the teams in the playoffs will watch that film intently and see how that disrupted Brock's rhythm and Kyle's rhythm. What do you think?
Yeah, I can see where Kyle Van Noy is coming from. And all throughout this week after watching that game, I've kind of been on the point where the numbers and the scoreboard looked a little bit worse than how the game actually played out to me. When
Yeah.
I was watching that game, I did not feel like San Francisco got dominated as far as game flow, as far as execution. I really just look at it as San Francisco turned the ball over 5 times. And when you were -5 in the turnover department, it's impossible to win. And in the NFL, when you lose the turnover battle, just in general, not -5, especially against one of the best teams in the NFL, if not the best team in the NFL, with how they beat San Francisco, you lose between 70 and 80% of the time. And I put out a tweet that caught a lot of traction. It has 500,000 views at this point. The Niners had more passing yards than the Ravens, 308 to 241. The 49ers had more rushing yards than Baltimore, 121, 102. Baltimore had the number 1 rushing defense in the NFL, and they were giving up the fewest points going in the NFL. San Francisco also outgained Baltimore 429 to 343. And then when you look at yards per play, San Francisco had the edge there, 6.3 to the Ravens 5.4. And some people have countered that with saying all of those are garbage time stats. No, they're not, because San Francisco at halftime, when it was actually a close game, they were on pace for 500 yards of total offense. They had 2 turnovers in the red zone. Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle went off. Christian McCaffrey had more than 100 rushing yards. Did the Ravens do some things to confuse San Francisco? For sure. Did Brock Purdy look a little bit flustered and a little bit mentally rattled for maybe the first time of his career? Yeah, he did. Do I have some concerns about Baltimore playing zone defense, which really negates what Kyle Shanahan likes to do with all of the pre-snap motion to try to give his offense and the playmakers an edge to put them in a position to succeed and to beat the defense? No doubt. And maybe that's the blueprint that Kyle Van Noy is talking about, where defenses now are going to play a lot of zone. They're going to take away the middle of the field and take away the intermediate area of the field. But with Jimmy Garoppolo And in these Kyle Shanahan offenses, they've always targeted the middle area of the field. And Kyle Shanahan's offenses have been able to have so much success throughout his coaching career. Another big concern that I do have, Ravens came in with the most sacks in the NFL, and San Francisco gave up 22 pressures, its most since week 1 against Pittsburgh. When it's week 1 and you're still trying to figure out communication, snap count, timing along the offensive line, it's understandable that you can have those pressures given up, especially when Colton McKivitz was going up against TJ Watt. And what happened last year for the Niners against the Cowboys and against the Eagles? They got their asses kicked in the trenches with their offensive line. And San Francisco has neglected and failed to really invest in that group outside of Trent Williams' large contract and Aaron Banks being a second-round pick. The Niners are 25th in team spending along the offensive line. So zone defense, offensive line, those are kind of my concerns, but the Niners were able to move the football. Brock Purdy through the air had a lot of explosive plays. Christian McCaffrey against the number 1 rushing defense still had a lot of success. If the Niners score a touchdown on that first drive, instead of Brock Purdy throwing that awful pick to Kyle Hamilton, in which Hamilton baited him into making that throw and Purdy didn't really see him, is it a different game because San Francisco is able to take that lead? So I don't think that the Niners got their asses kicked. I think the narrative that they got absolutely dominated and outclassed is false. I think Kyle Van Noy has some points. Maybe some teams are going to try to run that zone defense a little bit more. Maybe they're going to try to bring edge pressure. But can you counter that with the little screen? Can you counter that with the draw? Can you counter that with Christian McCaffrey leaking out of the backfield after faking pass pro where you can dump it off to him, or George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk on a little bit of a flare in route and you dump it off to him because they're bringing that pressure off the edge. There are ways for San Francisco to make the necessary adjustments, but also at the same time, it's kind of a conversation here that I'm having of two things can be true at the same time. You're looking at the Niners' performance against Baltimore. They really struggled. The Niners against Cleveland, they really struggled. The Niners against the Bengals, they really struggled. Those are good defenses with really good defensive coordinators who have had Kyle Shanahan's number.
Well, it makes you wonder, is the AFC the better conference?
Yeah.
I mean, is it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I thought the Niners and the Eagles were the two best teams in the NFC, but then watching the way the Niners have handled Philly and Dallas and the way that they've been handled by some of those AFC teams makes me wonder if the AFC is just the better conference.
Yeah, and Brock Purdy's really struggled against the AFC throughout his entire career. If you look at some of the splits between the AFC and the NFC, he's far better against the NFC. And that's not all that surprising because he simply doesn't have a lot of familiarity going up against AFC opponents. And if you want to have the conversation about which conference is better, I just think that Baltimore is really, really good. But outside of Baltimore in the AFC, who are you really confident in? I know that the Browns are on this miraculous run, and this Joe Flacco story has been sensational. I never thought that I'd be saying this in late 2023, where last night I was excited to watch Joe Flacco, but he's still Joe Flacco, and he's thrown a lot of interceptable passes, and he's thrown a lot of picks so far. But in his 5 games, he's thrown only 1 less touchdown than Deshaun Watson did in 12 games as a Brown over the last 2 years, and he's played really well. They brought that explosive element. I really like Kevin Stefanski's offense. They can run it, they can throw it, and that defense is excellent, but they have some question marks. This Chiefs team is simply not the same team that they were last year. The Miami Dolphins have beaten one team with a winning record this year, and that's the fraudulent Dallas Cowboys. The Buffalo Bills are really scary, but they might have to go on the road in the wild card round to take on a Kansas City team if that's the 3-6 matchup. So Baltimore is really good. I'm not sure if the AFC is so much better than the NFC. Maybe they're a little bit less flawed, but it does bring up an interesting scenario where you try to predict who's going to make it to the Super Bowl. I still think San Francisco is the team to beat in the NFC because they're the most complete. I do worry about their inability to come back from deficits, both just in general, but also in the fourth quarter. We know that dubious Kyle Shanahan record. And with those physical defenses, especially some of them in the AFC North, if San Francisco meets those teams, how do they fare? I'd like to see the Niners go up against the Ravens again, and I think that they'd have some more answers. And I'm not too concerned about this Niners defense. Everybody wants to say they gave up scoring drives, 7 straight scoring drives for the first time since 2005. Yeah, but the Niners also turned the football over in the red zone, taking points off the scoreboard and around midfield. And when you have to defend Lamar Jackson, that running game, and Lamar has the best weapons that he's had so far in his career, he's so difficult to contain as a player too. That's easy doing for Baltimore. And as soon as they take over around midfield, they're within Justin Tucker field goal range to put up points on the scoreboard.